So the idea behind the talk, we wanted to increase awareness around the DevOps stuff. Before I actually showed up at Facebook, I really didn't know what DevOps was or who was using it or why it was important. But after I saw that's in use there, and we started to see it's in use pretty much everywhere. I mean, this whole talk, there's been multiple talks and tracks about DevOps. It's important to look at that from both an AppSec and NetSec point of view, and so not much as a way to move code faster and ship things quicker, but a way to also look at it from the NetSec point of view.
Yeah, and I bring sort of the, if Chris brings the NetSec side, I bring some of the AppSec side. So we kind of combined, because DevOps really is kind of living in both worlds. So we kind of combined our mischievous ways and
Can't say that.
try to go after this stuff.
And why this is important is a lot of times these DevOps tools are kind of serving as the shim between corp and dev and prod. So they're a lot of times holding the keys to the kingdom, so to speak. So just wanted to kind of educate and make awareness and how to fix some of these common issues that we're seeing in some of these tools. So why this talk? There was a DevOps talk going on in the Bay Area this week. Is anybody aware of that? Anybody follow Gene Kim or everything? Yeah, so I pulled up Twitter when I got off the plane, and all these people are talking about all this really cool DevOps things, and like people like Capital One, or they don't distinguish between CI and prod anymore. Blackboard, Target, and even Disney are using all these DevOps tools to move code and push code quicker, right? So I was like, oh, cool, that's awesome that it's convenient that we're going to talk about these things, and then these guys are using some of the tools that we're going to talk about.
So these are the tools, these are the topics we're going to discuss. We're going to walk through GitHub, some SCM or revision control tools. We'll talk a little bit quickly on AWS and how to sort of like pivot into AWS, and as well as some in-memory databases. Is there any familiarity with things like Redis? By a show of hands, Redis, Memcache? Sweet. Awesome. So, cool.
So GitHub, everybody's heard of GitHub? Does everybody know that it supports advanced search operators? So basically you can Google hack with GitHub? Yeah, no? Give me the finger, say no, nod your head, cool. Well, you can. So if you're looking for passwords, keys, session tokens, anything O's for people that commit code, you can use these search operators to find those things.
So when we talk about, basically I was playing around, and also one of the members of a development team, we were kind of just messing around and found out that, and this may be known to folks, but you can actually impersonate other folks in a way. So let's explain that concept for a minute. So basically the Git protocol itself, this isn't anything to do with GitHub. The Git protocol itself relies on your username and email address to basically determine who committed code. It shows up in the Git log as that person. That's really how you're identified. So that being said, I thought it'd be kind of fun to see if I couldn't commit code as Linus, or at least make it look like it's Linus. You guys know he wrote Git, right? That's sort of the joke there. Anyway, so I looked up his email address. You have to get this combination right. So I looked up his username, his email address, put those together in my git config file. Everyone has one if you're using Git. And it's hard to see there, but if you get the combo right with GitHub, they do rely on that Git versioning, that Git log, to actually determine who pushed code. So in this case, it just sort of looks like Linus committed to my repo. So that was kind of fun.
To include the icon, right? User icon.
Yeah, people trust pictures. That's sort of the caveat there. So that does not mean you get permissions to write to a repo. Obviously, you have to be permitted to write code to that repo. But that being said, and also here's the Git log. That's sort of what it looks like. So GitHub could use your credentials, your SSH, your HTTPS credentials to actually, show who's committing. And why that's kind of dangerous, I guess, is that you could submit a PR, right? You could submit a PR, and with the way rebasing works, with the way cherry picking works, you could in theory submit a PR. It looks like you're just merging in somebody else who somebody trusts that's on that core committing team. and then putting your code on top of it, and then submitting that pull request. And they might say, maybe look at your code, but not maybe look at the code of the person who's actually committing or a core contributing team member to that repo. So audit who's actually pushing code. Make sure that you are overly suspicious when merging in pull requests from, even on your open source projects, from outside parties.
Right, yeah, so the point of that is, you can make it look like the top contributor to that repo is just doing another PR, right? And if someone else is actually approving that code, it may be able to sneak its way in, right? So just using a little social engineering on that.
And there's probably other things, we're still, a lot of these topics are still evolving. They will be over the next year. We kind of talked about that together. So keep going down that road with social engineering and see what we can't do. But some things you should do if you're using GitHub, whether it be GitHub, .com, or whether it be the enterprise solution, you should make sure that you delete forks. So a member of your organization has the ability to fork a repo. However, if you remove that user from your organization, they still retain rights to that repo unless you specifically go in and change that. So we'll be publishing these slides. That link actually shows you how to do that. Also be wary because you have the ability when you fork a repo to turn a private repo public. So audit for that as well. In terms of two-factor authentication, that's a simple one. That's just an easy thing you should be doing. You should make sure that all the folks using that tool have a two-factor auth enabled.
Revision control tools. So lots of people tend to be using Git to manage their websites and other useful things. Kind of want to make sure that you're checking, do you have that exposed outside? Has anybody come across that in pen tests where someone's have their Git folder exposed? What happens if you get access to that folder? Does everything in that repo live in that folder, in the subfolders? Yes, cool. So if you can find that inside or outside, it basically allows you to download full source of everything in that repo. Tools you can use to do that are wget if directory listings are enabled, and then dvcs pillage and dvcs ripper that will actually archive and recreate that repo locally for you. And those are the links for those two tools. So if it's exposed and directory listings are enabled, so you've got two things against you right there, it's very simple, trivial in fact, to just wget-mirror it, grabs everything in that folder, do a git reset, and then you have the whole site. Pretty bad? Yeah? No? Just
Overwhelmed by the reaction, honestly.
yeah, I mean,
You guys are super.
yeah, no, all right. So for personal experience and research and talking to other pen testers, I've seen WordPress configs, database backups. I mean, you're just doing source of, if it's any sort of interpreted code, right? PHP or whatever, you're getting the source of that where you can obviously go through and look for other things later. So you're not getting the rendered, you're getting the original. It's everything that's in your repo. And you get that, you can't like git clone it, you're pulling it down from the files that live on the web server. So it's a pretty big deal if you can find that.
It's a fun one. It's a very fun one.
So to show kind of an example of who has that, that directory listing and Git, there was 20,000 results when I did that search. So that's 20,000 sites with wget. You can pull down all their stuff.
And remember, if you're getting source code, you probably, if it's like Django, for instance, or Rails, Rails 2.3, Django, some of the earlier versions where pickle serialization was used, if you get a legitimate config secret token type deal, you can actually throw up some remote code execution on that web server. So
It's not, yeah, it can be a big deal. So if it's not enabled, you need to test by looking for like git config or some of the other files that are there to make that whole set of tools work. Once they're there, you can use dvcs pillage or dvs ripper, which will basically parse some of the config files and start manually downloading all these files. dvcs pillage also supports Mercurial and Bazaar. Mercurial is kind of up and coming. So what you get, we kind of talked about it. Creds, config files, source code, backups, basically anything that's stored in that repo comes down to you. And like he had mentioned, the session keys, if you can get session keys for some of these apps, that equals shell in the box. So,
yeah, Metasploit has a module for just plugging that stuff in. And
yeah, especially for the Rails one. And so if you have that, anybody run GitHub internally for like an internal server? Going guys, right? Are you using like LDAP or AD off to that, right? So if you're not limiting that, there's always a test, kiosk, DevOps account. Once you can guess that password, now you can download source, do the advanced searching, right? Find other things inside. And we tend to think of things inside as trusted. Subversion, so for 1.6 and below, if the .entries file is exposed, you can basically walk the SVN chain and download the whole thing, essentially like we did with the wget. So there's an example URL. Metasploit provides a module that that automates that for you if that's exposed. And so for 1.7 and above, they store all that in a SQLite database. Again, if that is not protected or it's exposed or it's still there, there's a Metasploit module for that too that will download that SQLite database and allow you to parse all that source code out. Anybody use GitList? Anybody heard of it? I had actually never heard of it. Go ahead and hit the slide. But apparently it's popular because there were 6 million results with it. Never heard of it before this remote code execution came out earlier this year. But basically there's a remote code execution bug in it. Obviously it's really hard to reproduce. And slide. There's a Metasploit module for that as well. So if you find a vulnerable instance of that, it's another /pwn git shell thing. Again, got to keep up to date with like what versions of tools you're running, when these things get released, that sort of thing. Me? All right, I'm still talking, sorry.
Yeah, you're still talking.
So who uses Hudson and Jenkins? Cool, a few more people. Yay, interaction. All right, so we're sort of aware of what it does. We saw earlier in the slides that Disney and lots of other people use these tools. The guy from Rackspace talked about how they used it.
Yeah.
All right, so it's also runs on Tomcat or Glassfish. In the event you can't pwn Jenkins, you have other chances with Glassfish and Tomcat because they're not without their
vulnerabilities, yeah.
their issues, right? You guys know that. So where do you start for anything that's web? You start with Shodan and trying to get some examples of stuff. So because every Jenkins box is a Hudson box, you can search for xHudson as a HTTP header. In this case, we had like 20,000 results that were indexed in Shodan. Not bad. Went through again and searched with who's given you a 200, which means you have a higher likelihood of it being an unprotected Jenkins install. That gives you around 10,000, which is fun.
It says unprotected, no auth required, you can do whatever you want on it.
Yeah, I mean, not necessarily. There's more or less. You got to go look, but if it's configured right, it should 403 or 302 you off to a login page instead of like presenting you with data. So there's a Metasploit auxiliary module that will actually kind of enumerate those for you if you can identify one. We're going to talk about what /script gets you, what /new job gets you. Async people gives you a list of all the users on the box, so a good place to start for brute forcing if you need to get access that way. And excuse me, system info does what it looks like, tells you what kind of system it's running, what's the Java versions, what's the Linux versions, all those other things. Script. All right, so if the script console is open, it's trivial to gain remote code execution via the Groovy console. And there's a Metasploit module for it. Groovy, an example piece of Groovy code that would actually execute the whoami command for you is right there. It's basically Java. And this is kind of what it looks like in the script console. You put that section of code in the script console, and down at the bottom spits out the user that's running the Jenkins server. So in this case, the user Jenkins is running Jenkins.
Hard to see.
It's kind of hard to see, but it works. That's an example of how easy it is when you find the open module. Basically, just type in the URL, and Metasploit does the rest for you. So you can lock that down by turning on authentication. Jenkins supports LDAP, AD, local database, a couple other options. However, if you set it to local auth, you can just register as a user and just get access to the script console that way. So just something to be aware of. You want to talk this one, or you want me to?
Yeah, I can talk about this one. So as part of the build process, I'm just going to, do we need this for recording purposes?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, he's giving you the yes.
Oh, you're giving me yes.
He is.
Yes.
Yes, you
Okay,
do.
all right. I'll use this thing. Awesome. So as part of the build step, as it seems like many people in this room have used Jenkins and Hudson. So as part of the build step, what do you give it? You give it some bash commands, right? So awesome. So what we did was, just kind of messing around. This is nothing, too crazy, but we did a netcat reverse shell on some live boxes and or
test boxes are AWS boxes stood up. So.
Oh, that one. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, anyways, this actually, I can't say who, but if I've seen this happen, and it ended really, really badly. Somebody, and this is sort of the point, I guess, that we want to talk about at some point here is that that one step where you need access to a developer's box to then access these things that's nothing. You have to do a lot more to protect all this stuff. We'll talk about that later.
You can also have it cat files, and that will come out in the log, error log, right? So if you just want to cat something, cat the config file, and not get a shell, it will just run that and then spit that out in the build logs. So in the event you don't have access to all that other stuff, a lot of times you can browse code workspaces. So this is one we found just kind of searching around. Anybody know what's on the screen there? I got a giggle, so that means at least one person knows what it is. What is it? Right. Yeah. So it's the Ruby on Rails database credentials. Not good to be hanging out. What's that? Anybody know what that is?
You want to go again?
You should know the answer. It's the same answer. So the secret token for the Rails app, right? Just hanging out for everyone to see, no auth. So important to protect all those things behind a login. Jenkins gives you the ability to do it. You just need to turn it on. That's the takeaway from that.
Yeah, protect that Hudson instance at all costs. Okay, so I'm just briefly talk about AWS config file. So to help you out if you happen to phish a developer and get access to the box, where you want to go from there once you're on that box there's two separate directories. So the first one is if you're not familiar with AWS, or even if you are, so there's Elastic Beanstalk, there's EC2. Elastic Beanstalk's like a port of different, like a load balancer, an instance, a database, and that all kind of packaged up. And EC2 is just launching a Ubuntu or whatever machine. When you use AWS CLI tools, or if you use the EB stuff, all the CLI stuff, immediately this file is created under your home profile, your .aws directory. There's a config file, and there's two important things you need. So as somebody who has seen a lot of development environments or development shops who use AWS, the typical go-to is to give everybody as the most amount of access they can have. It's not like you can only access staging typically as you can access staging and prod. So if you get some of these keys, there's a high likelihood that you're going to be able to do something fun. So that's the first place. Second place is, now this is important for if you actually get access into the EC2 instance, you then want to go to your Elastic Beanstalk directory, grab out the plain text credentials that the AWS CLI tools thought were a good idea to put there in plain text.
Thank you.
And then you can leverage that to, are we drinking now?
Your homies didn't get you one. That's why he's the man.
Are you serious? Thank you. So anyways, sorry to throw the topic off here. So once you've got those credentials, and I'm specifically saying the access ID and the access key, so Andre Rancho, he created that guy. He created an awesome tool for footprinting, fingerprinting, and pivoting through the AWS environment, and all you need are these access keys. So, yeah, that's a good way. The other thing is that you can use AWS CLI, and you can use the Ruby AWS SDK gem. There's other libraries for different languages. You can just use that with those access keys to do a lot of fun things, right? Tear things down, destroy businesses. I don't remember the name of the business that recently kind of went under because all of the keys like this were stolen, and then their entire AWS infrastructure was tore down, and they literally said we were going to stop doing business. So, who was it? CodeSpace. That's right, CodeSpace. Thank you so much. That's amazing.
That's why he's awesome.
Very cool. Thank you.
Time to ratchet it up.
Yeah. I'll screw some things up now. Thank you.
All right, client provisioning tools. Drink. Who uses Chef? Cool, a couple people. We showed slides. Lots of people use Chef. Rackspace uses Chef. Lots of people use it. Basically allows you to decide how you want a server to look and then force that upon all the servers that you build. Is it Matt? Is that Matt that gave the Rackspace talk?
Yeah, Matt.
He gave a good talk on, hey, you should audit those recipes. That's a pretty cool idea. You should do that and build out things and test from there. Super cool. So it ships, by default, ships with a web interface. It tells you what the initial username and password is. Like, I'm right here and I can't even read that, but trust me, it says what the password is. So that's your first thing to try, right? Other than that, you can always try weak creds or the company's default password because that never works. You can leak environment variables and things. Man, that is just so blurry.
It is.
It really looked clear in the slides. Data bags. So you need credentials to actually deploy these things and configure things, and Chef gives you the ability to store those credentials in data bags. So if you can get access to those via that password, that makes life super easy. Anybody use Knife for that? So Knife is the command line interface. Thank you for raising your hand. Knife is the command line interface that does a lot of the same things that the web interface will do for you. We're mostly concerned from a NetSec point of view of credentials and getting credentials to move laterally and do fun things with. So a Knife data bag list will list the credentials that are available to you. So in this case, we had a Drupal one. We'll say that it spit out, hey, Drupal was there, then we can do a Knife data bag show Drupal, and we get admin password, database password, that sorts of things. Super useful. If you read the docs, it tells you you should actually encrypt those. It gives you the option to do that. So this is what you should see, or what I should see when I get on a box and say, oh, cool, they have a Drupal one. Let me find the Drupal creds, and then I get this encrypted blob of junk, which is no fun. To unencrypt that, you really just need the path to the secret file that probably resides on the host so someone can actually decrypt it when they need it. So important to know that exists, right? Good that you can encrypt it. It's just things to be aware of. Anybody use Vagrant? Vagrant's pretty slick. It ships. Everybody knows it ships with a default private key. Does everybody change that when they? I had one. There's at least one honest person in this crowd. Lots of people use it. There's no pass to sudo to root, which is pretty cool. So I was like, well, of course no one changes that stuff. So here's our fictional network where we scanned to see, using the Metasploit public key module to see, does everybody know there's a public key module so you can give it a private key and see if you can log in to mass sites? Awesome. Yeah, that's great. It's pretty handy. So I went through and scanned this fictional network looking for anybody that was using that private key for their server, and I found a few. So I was like super, super excited about this. I was like, yes, my fictional network is owned. So what ended up happening was most of those were like, it listed that twisted honeypot. It's actually like a Git server. So it will come back and say, yeah, you can log in, and but I'm not going to give you a shell. So I didn't put the sad panda meme up there, but I was pretty sad. And then I went through and did the SSH version on those. And then there's a couple there that let's see, 3 that don't actually say the Kippo honeypot. Those are actual Vagrant VMs that you can log into. Basically, pass it that private key that ships with Vagrant. There's a bunch of connection info. Do your who am I? I'm Vagrant. Just su to sudo su, and now you're root. So my fictional network had several boxes that had root shells for fictional users to use. Pretty cool. I didn't think that was going to work, but it did. Because surely everyone would read that big, giant, don't put this private key on your production stuff. Anyway, I found this while we were doing some research for this. So not my idea. It's the guy that wrote the blog post up there, but an idea for moving from guest to host, because Vagrant shares that /Vagrant folder, is to do like a post commit hook. And basically what it says on the screen there, do a post commit action, And even if they blow away that VM, it's going to stay and then do stuff once they. Yeah, I wish I had thought of that, but like, whoever did that's pretty awesome.
I think it's Max Fatesman.
I don't know, but it's pretty slick. I'm not sure the defense on that one. Sorry. Still me, man, drink. All right, who uses Kickstart? Kickstart's kind of like, I guess, the old version of doing some of that, right? It was now Chef will do this for you. Back in the day, you could just use these Kickstart scripts to do basically the same thing. What's interesting is how they set the root password. You have 3 options. During the install run, you can say, I just want to enter it then. No one does that because that's not agile or quick or anything. It's miserable. The second option would be to do a root encrypted password, and the third option would be root plain text. Do you think anybody would be so silly as to do a plain text one? All right, so I did find a couple examples on the internet through my GitHub searching. So on the left is one that's doing encrypted. On the right is one that's doing a plain text one. And then just another example of encrypted and another one. So, if you found yourself on an internal network and you can locate these Kickstart files, that would be something to look for, to parse, to try to use those passwords to move laterally. So I guess the takeaway from that would be make that a throwaway one, or make some way to change that out, or don't use that password everywhere else. Something, a challenge. You said you'd do this slide.
So for Elasticsearch, if anybody familiar with Elasticsearch, cool, few people. So
I'm new to it, but it's awesome.
in-memory searching with, what's that?
Solves every problem.
Yeah, it does. Hell yeah.
Nice.
Put everything in it. Put everything in it. That's where it all belongs.
I mean, you just, yeah, put everything in it.
That's where it goes. It goes in Elasticsearch, so you can find it easily later.
And that's really the point, right? It's supposed to be an in-memory searchable place to go with a nice JSON response that you can parse and use in your application. So it's actually a really nice service. A lot of the things I think AWS gives are nice.
So by default, no authentication. Actually, I don't think there's authentication at all. You can search everything via the HTTP API, so GET requests just bring back JSON blobs and all the data there. You can update data without authentication with put requests. So I really can't think of anything useful to do with that, but I'm just kidding, I can. You can also join an open cluster, right? So if you see one open, you can basically say, hey, cluster, I want all your data. So you can just say, give me all that data, and then parse it later on my own terms. And it also shipped with a remote, well, I don't know if it shipped. It had a remote code execution vulnerability for 1.2.0 and below. It basically enabled Java. So you could just say, hey, go ahead and run some Java for me. No problem. So example of that module. So if you find one, because it's a simple GET request away to find a vulnerable version, you can basically just pass it the IP, and it will run some Java for you, and you get your Metasploit Java interpreter shell back. Pretty useful, if you like that sort of thing. But searching via curl and browser is pretty cumbersome, and I'm getting older and lazier in my age. So thankfully someone from work pointed out Kibana to me. Anybody use that or know what that is? It's basically a browser. It handles under the hood all the search requests you need to do with like curl or whatever to pull all that data in for you. So simple to use. You edit the config.js file to point to the Elasticsearch instance that's open. Just open the index.html file either locally or hosted on a web server. Once you do that, you get an awesome looking HTML page that looks like this. Down there at the bottom, we can see the various document types that exist in that Elasticsearch index. Of interest to us in this case was the product one that had 503 entries. This isn't like super sexy data, but you can imagine that, this tool doesn't care what the data is. It's if you find something that's interesting, then you can very easily start navigating this. We see our products. We see all the various fields in the products. Maybe you can. It looks blurry from here. Maybe it's just the beer, the booze. And then you can drill down into each individual record. So in the event you find something interesting or you want to update something interesting, you can use this tool to do that for you. Pretty useful. That's like way easier than like trying to read all this crazy output, even with the pretty print that it will give you.
So I guess I actually have to talk now.
Finally, I can drink.
Yeah, many people in this room have raised their hands, so they're familiar with Redis. So should come of no shock that Redis does not support any encryption whatsoever. And on top of that, I have heard that folks are trying to use S-tunnel to actually encrypt the connection back and forth, but for the most part, stuff's open. Throw a username and password that way if it requires it, which again, by default, it does not require credentials, so you actually have to set that. Yeah. And then it listens to all interfaces so by default, when it's spun up, it listens on all interfaces. You can change that to just like a local host, for instance, but most people don't seem to do that. So you should definitely never put this out public facing ever. Like that's a bad idea.
Bad idea. Let me add too, there's a Metasploit module for that too. That's like the reoccurring theme of the day. There's also nmap script to do it. So because it's essentially telnet, there's no rate limiting on, so if you do set auth, you can just really throw a lot of passwords at it. There's no restriction on how quickly you can guess. It's really as fast as the network will keep up.
Yeah, and luckily Redis runs really fast, so.
It's in memory.
So,
keep all the things.
How prevalent is it? I did a search, and it's terrible looking up there, but that's version 2.8.3, and I did the major and minor versions. And the reason was I just wanted to see, even on like that very specific version of Redis, what would come back. And so it's over 1,000 results. China actually and the US were the leaders on that. But these are people that just put it out there. There was a lot of EC2, but I didn't want to touch that because I didn't want to mess with them. I don't really care about messing with China, but that's fine.
The lab. The lab.
So you can do. Oh, sorry, the lab. So you can you can use the Redis CLI, and you can go in and you can run some commands. You can look for the keys, and you can start. There's basically a whole list of commands you have to run to get some meaningful data out. It actually is kind of time intensive, and I'm also getting older and lazier. So we just use Redis's desktop manager, and like for instance, here was an open Redis server that just had an email address, password hashed, other useful data, and if you're interested in that stuff. There's also, if you like the lottery, there's some folks who put out some lottery type information that you can sort of modify if you wanted to.
Do you know what that's hashed in?
Sorry.
Do you know what that's hashed in?
Which one? The password?
Yeah. I just didn't know if it was.
I have no idea. I didn't actually look into it. I just kind of collecting information.
Like usual, running late on time. Just needed some proof that it's bad.
Yeah, and then it happens. So interesting stuff. So if you get on a Redis box, I'm going to talk about this stuff's already known, and then there's another bit that I want to talk about. So Flush All removes everything from Redis and from all the databases. So if you want to just log into a box and make somebody's day terrible, that's one way. And then for script load is for actually, so it's Redis runs Lewis scripts, right? So, but it sandboxes, and I'll get into that in a second. Sandboxes what kind of libraries you can run code out of and what methods are available to you. So with script load, you can actually like give it some Lewis script string, and then it'll give you a SHA back, a SHA value, and then eval SHA can be used to use eval SHA, that hash 0, and it'll actually run the string that you put in there. Eval will just bypass that altogether. Oh, and why you would use that is because the script gets stored. Eval, on the other hand, doesn't store it, it just runs it, and your Lua code executes. So the sandbox. This is an interesting thing. It's a continuing, honestly, I've not slept much last week trying to bang against this. There's two avenues that I think are possible for remote code execution, but unfortunately, sorry guys, no proof today. Bytecode. There might be a way to do this through bytecode.
Lua bytecode.
Lua bytecode, I'm sorry, yeah, which would help you break out of that sandbox and actually execute system level type commands. And the other one is, and this is just a theory, that there is a table that tells you like what it kind of says these are the only functions that you can run. Here's your sort of sandbox. And you actually can reset that, and they specifically tell you, like, don't do that. And then you can define new functions. So if somebody wants to talk offline about some of the research behind this, I really do want to go ahead and, for the next couple of months, go head to head with Redis and see if we can't get some remote code execution. But again, sorry, I've tried, but not today. But in theory, it is possible.
So probably everybody's familiar with Memcache. Some of these newer tools have kind of replaced this in popularity, but it's been around a while. It's probably not going to go anywhere. No code exec today, or that I know of, in Memcache itself, although you can use some things that use Memcache for some of that. But I wanted to show some fun examples of things that I found in Memcache. So private keys, kind of useful. Nobody stores interesting things in Memcache. I'm sure you can't read that at all, but there is a username and password in the highlighted section, along with the URL that you need to use to log into said things. And to show, like, I didn't believe that it would ever work in a million years, but it did. Which is pretty awesome. So it kind of goes that you need to be aware of, like, what you're storing in there. You read all the docs will say don't put sensitive stuff in there. Nobody would ever do that, but if you do, you need to make sure that we're protecting that stuff. So what can we do about this? I had this slide even before your keynote. So,
And just to be clear, Chris is the one who thought we should talk about fixing the problem. So big round of applause for him, because I don't care. I build all day long. I want to bring it. So
I'm actually like a fixer in training at the new gig. So it's a new thing to, like, think further than the process, besides, like, oh, you're screwed, here you go. That's what I've been doing for most of my professional life, is you're fucked later. We're working through, like, how do you identify this and fix that stuff, which is a lot more challenging than I thought it would be. Like, yeah, it's a lot more challenging. Like, I think every pen tester needs to kind of do what Chris was talking about and spend some time hanging out with the blue guys, and, like, how to fix that, because I would have been a lot nicer to clients and people had I known how hard it is to actually get that stuff fixed. Yeah, it's been a big eye-opener. So anyway, what you can do about it. What you can take home today is, if you have Jenkins, go through and make sure that stuff is not accessible, right? If it's public, really make sure that, hey, is script enabled? Can someone just build a new job and run code on my box? Can they just register an account and do the same things? If it's inside, be aware that, you're a fish away from someone interacting with that server, the source code on it. Those things usually have SSH keys to talk to all the slaves. Those things have SSH keys to push new code into QA or prod. Think about what happens when someone gains access to that server, and then lock it down. We might have to do a little bit to, like, make sure everyone has the password, but it supports AD. So if you want to use AD creds, it's pretty trivial to set up LDAP AD auth. You can use your Windows creds to authenticate. Ensure access to these tools, so Redis, Memcache, Elasticsearch. Everybody in Corp doesn't need access to that, most likely, right? So let's use IP tables, firewall, router ACLs, whatever we need to do to firewall that off, or just do some looking to see what's being stored, right? So if you could make the risk management decision that, hey, I'm actually not storing anything that's that critical, and then it's not a big deal, but at least you know. If you're using Vagrant, change out your keys. Newer versions actually make this a lot easier to do for, like, sharing and getting remote access and things. And then update all these tools to the latest ones, because they're not really good at putting out vulnerabilities like git lists and everything else. Like, you wouldn't know from the GitHub site that there was a glaring, like, freaking Git shell, like Insta shell with the product. So you kind of got to, if you're using these tools, you got to keep up with the devs and the information that comes out on those.
yeah, and same concepts apply for AWS, right? Restrict who has access to what. I always hear, like, this drives me nuts. It really does. Like, when I hear people say, well, we trust, that's what our culture's about. Great, awesome, you trust everybody, fantastic. But you're going to get pwned, and it's going to hurt a lot. So, don't trust everybody. That's probably the goal. Like, just restrict who has access to product. The other part of that is definitely, when you do a PR, actually do a peer review on the code that's being pushed in. be suspicious, even if it's like a low end sort of, I shouldn't say low end, but like low volume in terms of like watches and everything with your open source projects. Just be careful. You never know. And with Redis, just don't put it out.
Don't.
Multiple layers of protection around Redis. And I by the way, I do commend the efforts of the folks that are writing Redis and Memcache. I think they're super useful from a dev perspective, because I am also a dev. But yeah, just protect it, keep it off the internet, and put multiple layers in front of it.
We made it. You didn't
That's
even
it.
have to like use your things. So. Bam!